Once again, thank you all for coming on as we continue with Reign of the King in Yellow. Series of stories by uh, Robert Chambers. So we're continuing with the story in the Court of the Dragon. O thou who burn'st in heart for those who burn in hell, whose fires thyself shall feed in turn, how long be crying mercy on them, God? Why, who art thou to teach and he to learn? In the church of St. Barnaby, vespers were over. The clergy left the altar. The little choir boys flocked across the chancel and settled in the stalls. Cisse in rich uniform marched down the south aisle, sounding a staff at every fourth step on the stone pavement. Behind him came that eloquent preacher and good man, Monsignor C. My chair was near the chancel rail. I now turned toward the west end of the church. The other people between the altar and the pulpit turned too. There was a little scraping and rustling while the congregation seated itself again. The preacher mounted the pulpit stairs and the organ voluntarily ceased. I had always found the organ playing of St. Barnaby highly interesting. Learned and scientific it was, too much so for my small knowledge, but expressing a vivid if cold intelligence. Moreover, it possessed the French quality of taste. Taste reigned supreme, self-controlled, dignified, and reticent. Today, however, in the first chord, I felt a change for the worse, a sinister change. During Vespers, it had been chiefly the chancel organ which supported the beautiful choir, but now and again, quite wantonly as it seemed, from the west gallery where the great organ stands, a heavy hand had struck across the church at the serene peace of those clear voices. It was something more than harsh and dissonant, and it portrayed no lack of skill. As it recurred again and again, it set me thinking of what my architect's books say about the custom in early times to consecrate the choir as soon as it was built, and that the nave being finished sometimes half a century later, often did not get any blessing at all. I wonder idly if that had not been the case at St. Barnaby, and whether something or not supposedly to be at home in a Christian church might have entered undetected and taken possession of the west gallery. I had read of such things happening too, but not in works on architecture. Then I remembered that St. Barnaby was not much more than 100 years old, and smiled at the incongruous associations of medieval superstitions with that cheerful little piece of 18th century Rococo. But now Vespers were over, and there should have followed a few quiet chords, fit to accompany meditation, while we waited for the sermon. Instead of that, the discord at the lower end of the church broke out with the departure of the clergy, as if now nothing could control it. I belong to those children of an older and simpler generation who do not love to seek for psychological subtleties in art, and I have ever refused to find in music anything more than melody and harmony. But I felt that in the labyrinth of sounds now issuing from that instrument there was something being hunted. Up and down the pedals changed him, while the manuals blared approval. Poor devil. Wherever he was, there seemed small hope of escape. My nervous annoyance changed to anger. Who was doing this? How dare he play that like in the midst of divine service? I glanced at the people near me. No one appeared to be in the least disturbed. The placid brows of the kneeling nuns still turned toward the altar, lost none of their devout abstraction under the pale shadow of their white headdress. The fashionable lady beside me was looking expectantly at Monsignor C. For all her face betrayed, the organ might have been singing an Ave Maria. But now at last the preacher had made the sign of the cross and commanded silence. I turned to him gladly. Thus far I had not found the rest I had counted on when I entered St. Barnaby that afternoon. I was worn out by 3 nights of physical suffering and mental trouble. The last had been the worst, and it was an exhausted body and mind, benumbed and yet acutely yet sensitive, which I had brought to my favorite church for healing, for I had been reading The King in Yellow. The sun ariseth, they gather themselves together and lay them down in their dens. Monsignor C. delivered his text in a calm voice, glancing quietly over the church. My eyes turned, I knew not why, toward the lower end of the church. The organist was coming from behind his pipes and passing along the gallery on his way out. I saw him disappear by a small door that led to some stairs which descend directly to the street. He was a slender man, and his face was as white as his coat was black. Good riddance, I thought, with your wicked music. I hope your assistant will play the closing voluntary. The feeling of relief. With a deep, calm feeling of relief, I turned back to the mild face in the pulpit and settled myself to listen. Here at last was the ease of mind I longed for. My children, said the preacher, one truth the human soul finds hardest of all to learn, that it has nothing to fear. It can never be made to see that nothing can really harm it. Curious doctrine, I thought. For Catholic priest, let us see how he will reconcile that with the Fathers. Nothing can really harm the soul, he went on, in his coolest, clearest tones, because... But I never heard the rest. My eye left his face. I knew not for what reason, and sought the lower end of the church. The same man was coming out from behind the organ, was passing on the gallery the same way. But there had not been time for him to return, and if he had returned, I must have seen him. I felt a faint chill, and my heart sank. And yet his going and coming were no affair of mine. I looked at him. I could not look away from his black figure and his white face. When he was exactly opposite to me, he turned and sent across the church straight into my eyes a look of hate, intense and deadly. I have never seen any other like it. Would to God I might never see it again. Then he disappeared by the same door which I had watched him depart less than 60 seconds before. I sat and tried to collect my thoughts. My first sensation was like that of a very young child badly hurt, when it catches its breath before crying out. I suddenly find myself the object of hatred was exquisitely painful, and this man was an utter stranger. Why should he hate me so? Me, whom I've never seen before. For the moment, all other sensations were merged in this one pang. Even fear was subordinate to the grief. For that moment, I never doubted. But then, the next I began to reason, and his sense of the incongruous came to my aid. As I have said, St. Barnaby is a modern church. It is small and well lighted. One sees all over it at a glance. The organ gallery sits a strong white light from a row of long windows in the clerestory, which have not even colored glass. The pulpit being in the middle of the church, it followed that, when I was turned toward it, whatever moved at the west end could not fail to attract my eye. When the organist passed, it was no wonder that I saw him. I had simply miscalculated the interval between his first and his second passing. He had come in that last time by the other side door. As for the look which so had set me, there had been no such thing. I was a nervous fool. I looked about. This was a likely place to harbor supernatural horrors. That clear-cut, reasonable face of Monsieur C., his collected manner and easy, graceful gestures, were they not just a little discouraging into the notion of a gruesome mystery? I glanced above his head and almost laughed. That flyaway lady supporting one corner of the pulpit canopy, which looked like a fringed damask tablecloth in high wind, at the first attempt of a basilisk to pose up there at the organ loft, she would have put her golden trumpet at him and puffed him out of existence. I laughed to myself over the conceit. which in the time I thought very amusing. It set me in chafe. Oh, pardon me. I laughed to myself over this conceit, which at the time I thought very amusing, and sat and chaffed myself and everything else with the old harpy outside the railing, who had made me pay 10 centimes for my chair before she would let me in. She was more like a basilisk, I told myself, than was my organist with the anemic complexion. From that grim old dame to, yes, alas, Monsieur C. for himself, for all devoutness had fled. I had never yet done such a thing in my life, but now I felt a desire to mock. As for the sermon, I could not hear a word of it, for the jingle in my ears of the skirts of St. Paul has reached, having preached just those 6 Lent lectures, more unctuous than ever he preached, keeping time to the most fantastic and irreverent thoughts. It was no use to sit there any longer. I must get out of the doors and shake myself free from this hateful mood. I knew the rudeness I was committing, but still I rose and left the church. A spring sun was shedding on the Rue Saint-Honoré as I ran down the church steps. On one corner stood a barrel full of yellow jonquils, pale violets from the Riviera, dark Russian violets and white Roman hyacinths, and a golden cloud of mimosa. The street was full of Sunday pleasure-seekers. I swung my cane and laughed with the rest. Someone overtook and passed me. He never turned, but there was the same deadly malignity in his white profile that had been in his eyes. I watched him as long as I could see him. His lithe back expressed the same menace. Every step that carried him away from me seemed to bear him or some on some errand connected with my destruction. I was creeping along, my feet almost refusing to move. There began to dawn in me a sense of responsibility for something long ago. It began to seem as if I deserved that which he threatened. It reached a long way back, a long, long way back. Lain dormant all these years, it was there, though, and presently it would rise and confront me. But I would try to escape, and I stumbled as best I could to the Rue de Rivoli, across the Place de la Concorde and on to the quay. I looked with sick eyes upon the sun shining through the white foam of the fountain, pouring over the backs of the dusky bronze river gods, and on the faraway arc, a structure of amethyst mist, on the countless vistas, gray stems and bare branches faintly green. There I saw him coming down one of the chestnut valleys of the Cours la Reine. I left the riverside, plunged blindly across to the Champs-Élysées, and turned toward the Arc. The sun was setting in its long rays along the green sward of the Rhone point. In full glow he sat on a bench, children and young mothers all about him. His was nothing but a Sunday lounger, like the others, like myself. I said the words aloud, and all the while I gazed on the malignant hatred of his face. But he was not looking at me. I crept past and dragged my leaden feet up the avenue. I knew that every time I met him brought me nearer to the accomplishment of his purpose and my fate, and still I tried to save myself. The last rays of sunset were pouring through the great arc. I pointed under it and met him face to face. I had left him far down the Champs-Élysées, and yet he came in with a stream of people who were returning from the Boy de la Ballone. Here came to close that he brushed me. A slender frame felt like iron inside its loose black covering. He showed no signs of haste, nor of remorse, nor of any human feeling. His whole being expressed one thing: the will and the power to work me evil. In anguish, I watched him where he went down the broad, crowded avenue that was all flashing with the wheels and trappings of horses and helmets of the Guard Republic Kyon. I live in the Court of the Dragon, a narrow passage that leads from the Rue des Reines to the Rue du Dragon. It is an impasse, traversal only for foot passengers. Over the entrance on the Rue des Reines is a balcony, supported by an iron dragon. Within the court, tall old houses rise on either side and close the ends of that give on the two streets. Huge gates, swung back during the day into the walls of the deep archways, close this court after midnight, and one must enter then by ringing a certain small door on the side. The sunken pavement collects unsavory pools. Steep stairways pitch down to doors that open on the court. The ground floor are occupied by shops of second-hand dealers and by iron workers. All day long the place rings with the clink of hammers and the clang of metal bars. Unsavory as it is, below there is a cheerfulness, comfort, and hard, honest work above. 5 flights are in the ateliers of architects and painters. In hiding place, sorry, I lost my place. And by ironworkers, all day long the place rings with clink of hammers and the clang of metal bars. Unsavory as is below, there is cheerfulness and comfort and hard, honest work above. 5 flights up are the ateliers of architects and painters, the hiding places of middle-aged students like myself who want to live alone. When I first came here to live, I was young and not alone. I had to walk a while before any conveyance appeared. But at last I had almost reached Arc de Triomphe again. An empty cab came along, and I took it. From the Arc to Rue des Rondes is a drive of more than half an hour, especially when one is conveyed by a tired cab horse that has been at the mercy of Sunday feet makers. There have been times before I passed under the dragon's wings to meet my enemy over and over again, but I never saw him once, and now refuge was close at hand. Before the wide gateway, a small mob of children were playing. Our concierge and his wife walked among them with their black poodle, keeping order. Some couples were waltzing on their sidewalk. All the inhabitants of the court had trooped out into the street. The place was quite deserted, lighted by a few lanterns hung high up in which the gas burned dimly. My apartment was at the top of a house, halfway down the road. Dude, running up the looking back 10 paces at Severe in the court with you. He's coming straight on. Neither slowly nor swiftly. He but straight on to me, and now he looked at me for the first time since our eyes encountered across the church by... They met now again, and I knew the time had come. Retreating backward down the court, I faced him. I meant to escape by the entrance on Rue de Dragon. His eyes told me I never should escape. It seemed ages while we were going. I retreating, he advancing down the court in perfect silence. But I felt at last the shadow of the archway. The next step brought me within it. I had meant to turn here and spring back through the streets, but the shadow was not that of an archway. It was that of a vault. The great doors to the Rue de Dragon were closed. I felt this by the blackness which surrounded me, and by the same instant I read it in his face. How his face gleamed in the darkness, drawing swiftly nearer. The deep vaults, the huge closed doors, their cold iron clamps were all on this side. The thing which had threatened which he had threatened me had arrived. It gathered and bore me down from the unfathomous shadows, the point from which it would strike me as his infernal eyes, hopeless, set my back against the barred doors and defied him. There was a scraping of chains on the stone floor and a rustling of the congregation. I could hear Zeus's staff in the south aisle preceding Monsieur C to the sacristy. The kneeling nuns, roused from their devout abstractions, made their reverence and went away. The fashionable lady, my neighbor, rose also with graceful reserve. As she departed, her glance just flitted over my face in disapproval. Half dead, or so it seemed to me. It intensely alive to every trifle. I sat among the leisurely moving crowd, then rose too and went toward the door. I had slept through the sermon. Had I slept through the sermon? I looked up and saw him passing along the old gallery to his place. On his side, I saw the thin bent arm and the black covering look like one of those devils, nameless instruments which she laid in disused torture chambers. Of medieval castles. But I had escaped him. Through his eyes had said I escaped him. That which gave him the power over me came back out of oblivion, and where I'd hoped to keep it, for I knew him now. Death in the awful abode of lost souls. With my weakness long ago I had sent him. They had charged him for every other eye, but not for mine. I recognized him almost from the first. I've never doubted when he was come to do, and when I knew what my body would set safe in the cheerful little church, they had been hunting my soul in the court of the dragon. I crept to the door. The old organ broke out overheat with a blare. Dazzling lights filled the church, blotting the altar from my eyes. The people faded away. The arcs, the vaulted roof vanished. I raised my seared eyes to the fathomless glare, and I saw the black stars hanging in the heavens. The wet winds from the lake of Hyley chilled my face. And so, far away, over leagues of tossing clouds, I saw the moon dripping with spray, and beyond, the towers of Carcosa rose behind the moon. Death in the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him, had changed him for every other eye but mine, and now I heard his voice, rising, swelling, and thundering, the flaring light, and as I felt the radiance increasing poured over me in walls of flame. Then I sank into the depths, and I heard the king in yellow whispering to my soul, It is a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. That is the end of the story, The Court of the Dragon. Hi, Yggdrasil, welcome on in. Okay, so next story, which is the yellow sign. Let me... Sorry, I'm trying to get to the right place of the... Okay. Mm. Okay. Alright. Starting up. The yellow sign. Let the red dawn surmise what we shall do when this blue starlight dies and all is through. Part 1. There are so many things which are impossible to explain. Why should certain chords in music make me think of the brown and golden tints of autumn foliage? Why should the Mass of Saint Cecile bend my thoughts, wandering among caverns, whose walls blaze with ragged masses of virgin silver? What was it in the roar and turmoil of Broadway at 6 o'clock that flashed before my eyes the picture of a still Breton forest, where sunlight filtered through spring foliage and Sylvia bent, half curiously, half tenderly, over a small green lizard, murmuring, "To think that this also is a little ward of God." When I first saw the watchman, his back was toward me. I looked at him indifferently until he went into the church. I paid no more attention to him than I had to any other man who lounged through Washington Square that morning, and when I shut my window and turned back into my studio, I had forgotten him. Late in the afternoon, the day being warm, I raised the window again and leaned out to get a sniff of air. A man was standing in the courtyard of the church, and I noticed him again with as little interest as I had that morning. I looked across the square to where the fountain was playing, and then, with my mind filled with vague impressions of trees, asphalt drives, and the moving groups of nursemaids and holidaymakers, I started to walk back to my easel. As I turned, my listless gaze included the man below in the churchyard. His face was toward me now with a perfect, involuntary movement. I bent to see it. The same moment he raised his head and looked at me. Instantly I thought of a coffin worm. Whatever it was about the man that repelled me, I did not know, but the impression of a plump white grave worm was so intense and nauseating that I must have shown it in my expression, for he turned his puffy face away with a movement which made me think of a disturbed grub in a chestnut. I went back to my easel and motioned the model to resume her pose. After working a while, I was satisfied that I was spoiling what I had done as rapidly as possible, and I took up a palette knife and scraped the color out again. The flesh tones were sallow and unhealthy, and I did not understand how I could have painted such sickly how I could have painted such sickly color into a study which before that that glowed with healthy tones. I looked at Tessie. She had not changed, and the clear flush of health dyed her neck and cheeks as I frowned. "Is it something I've done?" she said. "No, I've made a mess of this arm. For the life of me, I can't see how I came to paint such mud as that into the canvas," I replied. "Don't I pose well?" she insisted. "Of course, perfectly. Is that my fault?" "No, it's my own." "I'm very sorry," she said. I told her she could rest while I applied rags and turpentine to the plague spot on my canvas. She went off to make cigarette smoke. Smoke a cigarette and look over the illustrations in the your friends in the French Courier Francis. I did not know whether it was something in the turpentine or a defect in the canvas. The more I scrubbed, more or like a I scrubbed the more that. Sorry. I did not know whether it was something in the turpentine or a defect in the canvas. The more I scrubbed, the more that gangrene seemed to spread. I worked like a beaver to get it out, yet the disease appeared to creep from limb to limb of the study before me. Alarmed, I shoved to arrest it. Now the color on the breast changed, and the whole figure seemed to absorb the infection, as a sponge soaks up water. Vigorously, I applied palette knife, turpentine, and scraper, thinking all the time what a seance I should hold with Duval would sold me the canvas. Soon I noticed that it was not the canvas which was defective, nor yet the colors of Edward. It must be the turpentine, I thought angrily. Yes, I applied palette knife and scraper, thinking all the time about a seance I should hold with Duval, who had sold me the canvas. Soon I noticed that it was not the canvas which was defective, nor yet the colors of Edward. It must be the turpentine, I thought angrily. My eyes have become so blurred and confused by the afternoon light that I can't see straight. I called Tessa, the model. She came and leaned over my chair, blowing rings of smoke into the air. "What are you doing? Or what have you been doing?" she exclaimed. "Nothing," I growled. Must be this turpentine. Horrible color it is now. Do you think my flesh resembles green cheese? "No, I don't," said Ed grimly. Didn't you ever come to... Oh, I say, do you ever know me to paint like that before? No, indeed. Well then. Must be the turpentine or something, she admitted. She slipped on a Japanese robe and walked to the window. I scraped and rubbed until I was tired, and finally picked up my brushes and hurled them through the canvas with a forcible expression, the tone alone of which reached Tessie's ear. Nevertheless, she began, "That's it. Swear and act silly and ruin your brushes. You have been there 3 weeks on that study, and now look, what's the good of ripping the canvas? What creature artists are?" I felt about as much ashamed of as I usually did after such an outbreak, and I had turned the ruined, tear-stained man, that's it. Swear and act silly and ruin your... crap. Tessie helped me clean my brushes, then danced away to dress. From the screen she regaled me with a bit of advice concerning whole or partial loss of temper, until thinking, perhaps, I had been tormented sufficiently, she came out to implore me to button her waist where she could not reach it on the table. Which she could not reach on the shoulder. Everything went wrong from the time you came back from the window and talked about that horrid-looking guy you saw in a churchyard, she announced. He probably bewitched the picture, I said, yawning. I looked at my watch. It's after 6, I know, said Tessie, adjusting her hat for the mixture. Yes, I replied. I don't mean to keep you so long. I leaned out the window, but recoiled to discuss, for the young man with the pasty face stood below in the churchyard. Tessie saw my disapproval and leaned in from the window. Is that the man you don't like? She whispered. I nodded. Okay. I gotta do an ad break, but then we'll be right back afterwards. See y'all in 3 minutes. I will have the words on stream, so if you happen to have a sub or anything like that. Okay, I'm back. Okay, let me see. Where was I? Okay, here. Right. Everything went wrong that time you came back from the window and talked about that horrid-looking man you saw in the churchyard, she announced. Yes, he probably bewitched the picture, I said, yawning. I looked at my watch. It's after 6, I know, said Tessie. Uh... Right. It's after 6, I know, said Tessie, adjusting her hat before the window. Yes, I replied. I didn't mean to keep you so long. Leaned out at the window, but recoiled with disgust, for the young man with the pasty face stood below in the churchyard, saw my gesture of disapproval, and leaned from the window. Is that the man you don't like? She whispered. I nodded. I can't see his face, but he does look fat and soft, some way or the other, she continued. Look at me. Reminds me of a dream, an awful dream I once had. Or, she mused, looking down at her shapely shoes. Was it a dream after all? How should I know? I smiled. She smiled in reply. You were in it, she said. So perhaps you might know something about it. Tessie, I protested. Don't you dare flatter me by saying that you dream about me. But I did, she insisted. Shall I tell you about it? Go ahead, I replied, lighting a cigarette. Tessie leaned back windowsill and began very seriously. One night last winter, I was lying in bed thinking about nothing at all in particular. I had been posing for you when I was tired out, and it seemed impossible for me to sleep. I heard the bells in the city ring 10, 11, and midnight. I must have fallen asleep about midnight because I don't remember hearing the bells after that. To me that I had scarcely closed my eyes when I dreamed that something impelled me to go to the window. I rose and raising the sash, leaned out. 25th Street was deserted as far as I could see. I began to be afraid. Everything outside seemed so black and uncomfortable. Then the sound of wheels in the distance came to my ears. It seemed to me as though that was what I must wait for. Very slowly the wheels approached, and finally I could make out a vehicle moving along the streets. It came nearer and nearer, and when it passed beneath my window I saw it was a hearse. Then, as I trembled with fear, the driver turned and looked straight at me. When I awoke, I was standing by the open window, shivering with cold, but the black-plumed hearse and driver was gone. I dreamed this dream again and again awoke beside the open window. Last night the dream came again. For how it was raining, when I awoke standing at the open window, my nightdress was soaked. But where did I come into the dream? I asked. You were in the coffin. You were not dead. In the coffin? Yes. How did you know? Could you see me? No, I only knew you were there. Had you been eating Welsh rarebits or lobster salad? I began laughing, but the girl interrupted me with a frightened cry. Hello, what's up? I said as she shrank into the embrasure by the window. The man below in the churchyard. He drove the hearse. Nonsense, I said. Tessie's eyes were wide with terror. I went to the window and looked out. The man was gone. Come, Tessie, I urged. Don't be foolish. You have posed too long. You're nervous. Do you think I could forget that face? She murmured. 3 times I saw the hearse pass below my window, and every time the driver turned and looked up at me. His face was so white and soft. It looked dead. Looked as if it had been dead a long time. I induced the girl to sit down and swallow a glass of marsala. Then I sat down beside her and tried to give her some advice. Look here, Tessie, I said. You can go to the country for a week or two, and you'll have no more dreams about hearses. You pose all day, and when night comes, your nerves are upset. You can't keep this up. Then again, instead of going to bed when your work day is done, you run off to picnics at Sulzer Park or go to the El Dorado or Coney Island. And when you come down here next morning, you are tired out. There was no real hearse. There was a soft-shell crab dream. She smiled faintly. What about the man in the churchyard? He's only an ordinary, unhealthy, everyday creature. And as true as my name is Tessie Reardon, swear to you, Mr. Scott, the face of the man below in the churchyard is the face of the man who drove the hearse. What of it? I said. It's an honest trade. Then you think I did see the hearse? Oh, I said it diplomatically. If you really did, it might not be unlikely that the man below drove it. There's nothing in that. Tessie rose, unrolled her scented handkerchief, and taking a bit of gum from a knot in the hem, placed it in her mouth. Then, drawing on her gloves, she offered me her hat with a frank, "Good night, Mr. Scott," and walked out. Okay, that is part 1. Hold on a second. Keep up. Oh, I got you, donkey. Okay. All right. All right, part 2. The next morning, Thomas the bellboy brought me the Herald and a bit of news. The church next door had been sold. I thanked heaven for it. Not that being a Catholic I had any repugnance for the congregation next door, but because my nerves were shattered by a blatant exhorter, whose every word echoed through the aisle of the church as if it had been my own room, and who insisted on his R's with a nasal persistence, which revolted my every instinct. Then, too, there was a fiend in human shape, an organist, who reeled off some of the grand old hymns with an interpretation of his own, and I longed for the blood of a creature who played the doxology with an amendment of minor chords which one hears only in a quartet of very young undergraduates. I believe the minister was a good man, but when he bellowed, "And the Lord said unto Moses, the Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. My wrath shall wax hot, and I shall kill you with the sword," I wondered how many centuries of purgatory it would take to atone for such a sin. "Who bought the property?" I asked Thomas. "Nobody that I know, sir. They do say that the gent what owns this here Hamilton flats was looking at it. Might be by building more studios." I went to the window. The young man with the unhealthy face stood by the churchyard gate, and at the mere sight of him, the same overwhelming repugnance took possession of me. "By the way, Thomas," I said, "who's that fellow down there?" Thomas sniffed. "That there worm, sir? He's night watchman of the church, sir. He makes me tired of sitting out all night on them steps and looking at you insulting like. I'd a punch his head in, sir. Beg pardon, sir. Go on, Thomas." "One night, coming home with Ori, the other English boy, I sees him a-sitting there on the steps. We had Molly and Jen with us, sir, the 2 girls on the tray service. And he looks so insulting at us that I up and says, 'What you looking at, you fat slug?' Beg pardon, sir, but that's how I says, sir. Then he don't say nothing, and I says, 'Come out and I'll punch that puddin' head.' And I hopes the gate goes in, but he don't say nothing, only looks insulting like. Then I hits him one, but Is was that cold and mushy at 6 blah. His head is that cold and mushy. It's sicken you to touch it. Touch him. What did he do then? I asked curiously. Him? Nothin'. And you, Thomas? The young fellow flushed with embarrassment and smiled uneasily. Mr. Scott, sir. I ain't no coward. I can't make it. All while I run, I was in 5th Lawrence Sir Burglars at El Kabir, and was shot by the Wells. You don't mean to say you ran away? Yes, sir, I run. Why? This is just what I want to know, sir. I grabbed Molly and run, and the rest was as frightened as I. But what were they frightened at? Thomas refused to answer for a while, but now my curiosity was aroused about the repulsive young man below, and I pressed him. 3 years' sojourn in America had not only modified Thomas' Cockney dialect, but had given him the American sphere of ridicule. You won't believe me, Mr. Scott, sir. Yes, I will. Will you laugh at me, sir? Nonsense. Yes, it did. Sir, it's God's truth that I'm at him. He grabbed me wrist, sir, and when I twisted his soft, mushy fist, one of his fingers come off in me, and the other loathing and horror of Thomas' face had been reflected in my word, for he added, It's awful. Now when I see him, I just go away. He makes me ill. Thomas had gone. I went to the window. The man stood beside the church railing with both hands on the gate. But I hastily retreated to my easel again, sickened and horrified, for I saw that the middle finger of his right hand was missing. At 9 o'clock, Tessie appeared and vanished behind the screen with a merry good morning, Mr. Scott. When she reappeared and taken her pose upon the model stand, I started a new canvas. Much to her delight, she remained silent as long as I was on the drawing, but as soon as the scrape of the charcoal ceased and I took up my fixative, she began to chatter. Well, I had such a lovely time last night. To Tony Pastor's. Who are we? I demanded. Oh, Maggie, you know, Mr. White's model, and Pinky McCormick. We call her Pinky because she's got that beautiful red hair you artists like so much. And Lizzie Burke. I sent a shower of spray from the fixative over the canvas and said, Well, go on. We saw Kelly and Baby Barnes, the skirt dancer, and all the rest. I made a mash. Then you have gone back on me, Tessie. She laughed and shook her head. He's Lizzie Burke's brother, Ed. He's a fine gentleman. But constrained to give her some parental advice concerning mashing, when she took with a bright smile. Well, I can take care of a strange mash, she said, examining her chewing gum. But Ed is different. Lizzie is my best friend. Then she related how Ed had come back from the stocking mill in Lowell, Massachusetts, to find her and Lizzie grown up. What an accomplished young man he was, and how he thought nothing of squandering $50 for ice cream and oysters to celebrate his entry as clerk in the woolen department of Macy's. Before I began to paint, she resumed the pose, and smiling and chattering like a sparrow. By noon I had the study fairly well rubbed in, and Tessie came to look at it. That's better, she said. I thought so too, and ate my lunch with a satisfied feeling that all was going well. Tessie spread her lunch on the drawing table opposite me, and we drank our claret from the same bottle and lighted our cigarettes from the same match. I was very much attached to Tessie. I'd watched her shoot up into a slender but exquisitely formed woman from a frail, awkward child. She had posed for me during the last 3 years, and among all my models, she was my favorite. It would have troubled me very much indeed had she become tough for flies, the phrase goes, but I never noticed any deterioration of her manner, and felt at heart she was all right. She and I never discussed morals at all, and I had no intention of doing so, partly because I had none myself, and partly because I knew she would do what she liked in spite of me. Still, I did hope she would steer clear of complications, because I wished her well, and then also I had a selfish desire to retain the best model I had. I knew that mashing, as she termed it, had no significance with girls like Tessie, that such things in America did not resemble in the least the same things in Paris. Yet, having left with my eyes open, I also knew that somebody would take Tessie away someday in one manner or another, and that I professed to myself that marriage was nonsense. I sincerely hoped that in this case, there would be a priest at the end of the vista. I am a Catholic. When I listen to High Mass, when I sign myself, I feel that everything, including myself, is more cheerful, and when I confess, it does me good. A man who lives as much alone as I do must confess to somebody. Then again, Sylvia was Catholic, and it was reason enough for me. But I was speaking of Tessie, which is very different. Tessie was also Catholic and much more devout than I. So, taking it all in all, I had little fear for my pretty model until she should fall in love. But then I knew that fate alone would decide her future for her, and I prayed inwardly that fate would keep her away from men like me, and throw into her path nothing but Ed Burke's and Jimmy McCormick's. Bless her sweet face. Tessie set blowing rings of smoke up the ceiling and tinkling the ice in her tumbler. "Did you know that I had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," Did you know that I had a dream last night?" I observed. "Not about that man," she laughed. "Exactly. A dream similar to yours, only much worse." It was foolish and thoughtless of me to say this, but you know how little tact the average painter has. "I must have fallen asleep about 10 o'clock, I continued, and after a while I dreamt that I awoke, and plainly did I hear the midnight bells, the wind in the tree branches, and the whistle of steamers from the bay. Then even now I scarcely believe I was not awake. I seemed to be lying in a box which had a glass cover. Dimly I saw the street lamps as I passed. For I must tell you, Tessie, the box in which I reclined appeared to lie in a cushioned wagon, which jolted me over a stony pavement. After a while I became impatient and tried to move. But the box was too narrow. My hands were crossed on my breast, so I could not raise them to help myself. I listened and tried to call. My voice was gone. I could hear the trample of the horses attached to the wagon, and even the breathing of the driver. Then another sound broke upon my ears like the rising of a window sash. I managed to turn my head a little, and found I could look, not only through the glass of my box, but through the glass panes in the side of the covered vehicle. I saw houses empty and silent, with neither light nor life about any of them excepting one. In that house a window was open on the first floor, and a figure in white stood looking down the street. It was you. Tessie had turned her face away and leaned on the table with her elbow. "I could see your face," I assumed. "Seemed to me very sorrowful." Then we passed and turned into a narrow black lane. Presently the horses stopped, and I waited and waited, closing my eyes with the fear and impatience. But all was silent as the grave. After that, which seemed to me hours, I began to feel uncomfortable. A sense that somebody was close to me made me unclose my eyes. Then I saw the white face of the hearse driver-looking man at the coffin lid. A sob from Tessie interrupted me. She was trembling like a leaf. I saw I had made an ass of myself and attempted to repair the damage. "Tess," I said, "I only told you this to show that what influence your story might have on another person's dreams. You don't suppose I really lay in a coffin, do you? What are you trembling for? Don't you see that your dream and my unreasonable dislike for that inoffensive watchman of the church simply set my brain working as soon as I fell asleep?" She laid her head between her arms and sobbed as if her heart would break. What a precious triple donkey I had made of myself. But I was about to break my record. I went over and put my arm about her. "Tessie, forgive me," I said. "I had no business to frighten you by such nonsense. You are too sensible a girl, too good a Catholic to believe in dreams." Her hand tightened on mine, and her head fell back upon my shoulder. But she still trembled, and I petted and comforted her. "Come, Tessie, open your eyes and smile." Her eyes opened with a slow, languid movement and met mine, but their expression was so queer that I hastened to reassure her again. "It's all humbug, Tessie. Surely you're not afraid that any harm will come to you because of that?" "No," she said, but her scarlet lips quivered. What's the matter? Are you afraid? Yes, not for myself. For me, then? I demanded gaily. For you, she muttered in a voice almost inaudible. I care for you. First I started to laugh, and when I understood her, a shock passed through me, and I sat like one turned to stone. This was the crowning bit of idiocy I had committed. During the moment which elapsed between her reply and my answer, I thought of 1,000 responses to that innocent confusion. I could pass it by with a laugh. I could misunderstand her and assure her to my health. I could simply point out that it was impossible she could love me. But my reply was quicker than my thoughts. And I might think and think now when it was too late, for I had kissed her on the mouth. That evening I took my usual walk in Washington Park, pondering over the occurrences of the day. I was thoroughly committed. There was no back out now. I stared the future straight in the face. I was not good, not even scrupulous. But I had no intention of deceiving either myself or Tessie. The one passion of my life lay buried in the sunlit forests of Brittany. Was it buried forever? Hope cried no. For 3 years I had been listening to the voice of hope, and for 3 years I had waited for a footstep on my threshold. Had Sylvia forgotten? No, cried hope. I said that I was no good. That is true. But still I was not exactly a comic opera villain. I had led an easygoing, reckless life, taking what invited me a pleasure, deploring and sometimes bitterly regretting consequences. And one thing alone, except my painting, was I serious, and that was something which lay hidden, if not lost, in Breton forests. It was too late to regret what had occurred during the day. Whatever it had been, pity, a sudden tenderness for sorrow, or the more brutal instinct of gratified vanity, it was all the same now, and unless I wished to bruise an innocent heart, my path lay marked before me. The fire and strength, the depth of passion of love which I never even suspected, with all my imagined experience in the world, left me no alternative but to respond or send her away. Whether because I am so cowardly about giving pain to others, or whether it was that I have little... Bleh. Or was it... Oh my gosh. Or whether it was that I have little of the gloomy Puritan in me, I do not know, but I shrank from disclaiming responsibility for that thoughtless kiss, and in fact, had no time to do so before the gates of her heart opened and the flood poured forth. Others who habitually do their duty and find a sullen satisfaction in making themselves and everybody else unhappy might have withstood it. I did not. I dared not. After the storm had abated, I did tell her that she might have loved Ed Burke and worn a plain gold ring, but she would not hear of it, and I thought perhaps as long as she had decided to love somebody she could not marry, it had better be me. I at least could treat her with an intelligent affection, and whenever she became tired of her infatuation, she could go none the worse for it, for I was decided on that point, although I knew how hard it would be. I remembered the usual termination of platonic liaisons, and thought how disgusted I had been whenever I heard of one. I knew I was undertaking a great deal for so unscrupulous a man as I was, and I dreamed the future, for never for one moment did I doubt that she was safe with me. Had it been anybody but Tessie, I should not have bothered my head about scruples, for it did not occur to me to sacrifice Tessie as I would have sacrificed a woman of the world. I looked the future squarely in the face and saw the several probable endings to the affair. She would either tire of the whole thing, or become so unhappy that I should have either to marry her or go away. If I married her, we would be unhappy, I with a wife unsuited to me, and she with a husband unsuitable for any woman, for my past life could scarcely entitle me to marry. If I went away, she might either fall ill, recover and marry some Eddie Burke, or she might recklessly or deliberately go and do something foolish. On the other hand, if she tired of me, then her whole life would be before her with the beautiful vistas of Eddie Burkes and marriage rings and twins and Harlem flats and heaven knows what. As I strolled along the trees by the Washington Arch, I decided that she should find a substantial friend in me anyway. The future could take care of itself. Then I went into the house and put on my evening dress. For the little faintly perfumed note on my dresser said, "Have a cab at the stage door at 11," and the note was signed, "Edith Carmichael, Metropolitan Theater." I took supper that night. Or rather, we took supper. Miss Carmichael and I, at Solari's. And the dawn was just beginning to gild the cross on the memorial church as I entered Washington Square after leaving Edith at the Brunswick. There was not a soul in the park as I passed along the tree and took the walk which leads from the Garibaldi statue to the Hamilton apartment house. As I passed the churchyard, I saw a figure sitting on the stone steps. In spite of myself, a chill crept over me at the sight of the white, puffy face, and I hastened to pass. Then he said something which might have been addressed to me, or might merely have been a mutter to himself. But a sudden furious anger flamed up within me that such a creature should address me. For an instant I felt like wheeling about and smashing my stick over his head, but I walked on, and entering the Hamilton, went to my apartment. For some time I tossed about the bed, trying to get the sound of his voice out of my ears, but could not. It filled my head, that muttering sound, like the thick oily smoke from a fat rendering vat or an odor of noisome decay. And as I lay and tossed about, the voice in my ears seemed more distinct, and I began to understand the words he had muttered. Then they came to me slowly as if I had forgotten them. At last I could make some sense out of the words. It was this: "Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign?" I was furious. What did he mean by that? Then with a curse upon him and his, I rolled over and went to sleep. When I awoke later, I looked pale and haggard, though I dreamed the dream of the night before, and it troubled me more than I cared to think. I dressed and went down into my studio. Tessie sat by the window, but as I came in, she rose and put both arms around my neck for an innocent kiss. She looked so sweet and dainty that I kissed her again and then sat down before the easel. "Hello. Where's the study I began yesterday?" Tessie looked conscious but did not answer, and to hunt about the piles of canvases, saying, "Hurry up, Tess, and get ready. We must take advantage of the morning light." At last I get the search among the other canvases and turned to look around the room for the missing study. I noticed Tessie standing by the screen with her clothes still on. What's the matter?" I asked. "Don't you feel well?" "Yes." "Then hurry." "Do you want me to pose as I have always posed?" Then I understood. Here was a new complication. I had lost, of course, the best nude model I had ever seen. I looked at Tessie. Her face was scarlet. Alas, alas, we had eaten of the tree of knowledge. And Eden and native innocence were dreams of the past, I mean for her. I suppose she noticed the disappointment on my face, for she said, "Pose if you wish. The study is behind the screen here where I put it." "No," I said. "Begin something new." And I went into my wardrobe and picked out a Moorish costume which fairly blazed with tinsel. It was a genuine costume. Tessa retired to the screen with it enchanted. When she came forth again, I was astonished. Her long black hair was bound above her forehead with a circlet of turquoise, and the ends curled about her glittering girdle. Her feet were encased in the embroidered pointed slippers and skirt of her costume. Curiously wrought with arabesques and silver fell to her ankles. The deep metallic blue vest embroidered with silver, and the short Moresque jacket spangled and sewn with turquoises became her wonderfully. She came up to me and held up her face smiling. I slipped my hand into my pocket, and drawing out a gold chain with a cross attached, dropped it over her head. "It's yours, Tessie." "Mine?" she faltered. "Yours. Now go and pose." Then with a radiant smile she ran behind the screen, and presently reappeared with a little box on which was written my name. "I had intended to give it to you when I went home tonight," she said, "but I can't wait. Now." I opened the box. On the pink cotton inside by a classic of black onyx, on which was inlaid a curious symbol or letter in gold. It was neither Arabic nor Chinese, nor, as I found afterwards, did not belong to any human script. "It's all I had to give you for a keepsake," she said timidly. I was annoyed, but I told her how much I should prize it and promised to wear it always. She fastened it on my coat beneath the lapel. "How foolish, Tess, to go and buy me such a beautiful thing as this," I said. I did not buy it, she laughed. Where did you get it? She told me she found it one day while coming from the aquarium in Battery. How she had advertised it and watched the papers, but at last gave up all hopes of finding the owner. It was last winter, she said, the very day I had the first horror dream about the hearse. Remembered my dream of the previous night, but said nothing, and presently my charcoal was flying over a new canvas, and Tessie stood motionless on the model stand. That's the end of part 2. Take a swig of my tea. Okay, part 3. The following day was a disastrous one for me. While moving a framed canvas from one easel to another, my foot slipped on the polished floor, and I fell heavily on both wrists. They were so badly sprained that it was useless to attempt to hold a brush, and I was obliged to wander about the studio glaring at unfinished drawings and sketches, until despair seized me and I sat down to smoke and twiddle my thumbs with rage. The rain blew against the windows and rattled on the roof of the church, driving me into a nervous fit with its interminable patter. Tessie sat sewing by the window, and every now and then raised her head and looked at me with such innocent compassion that I began to feel ashamed of my irritation, and looked about for something to occupy me. I had read all the papers and all the books in the library, but for the sake of something to do, I went to the bookstore and shoved them open with my elbow. I went to the bookcases and shoved them open with my elbow. I knew every volume by its color and examined them all, bustling slowly around the library and whistling to keep up my spirits. I was turning to go in the dining room when my eye fell upon a book bound in serpent skin, standing at a corner of the top shelf of the last bookcase. I did not remember it, and from the floor could not decipher the pale lettering on the back. So I went to the smoking room and called Tessie. She came in from the studio and climbed up to reach the book. What is it? I asked. The King in Yellow. I was dumbfounded. Who had placed it there? How came it in my rooms? I had long ago decided that I should never open that book, and nothing on earth could have persuaded me to buy it. Fearful lest curiosity might tempt me to open it, I had never even looked at it in bookstores. If I ever had any curiosity to read it, the awful tragedy of young Castaigne, whom I knew, prevented me from exploring its wicked pages. I had always refused to listen to any descriptions of it. Indeed, nobody ever ventured to discuss the second part aloud, so I had absolutely no knowledge of what those leaves might reveal. I stared at the poisonous mottled binding as I would at a snake. Don't touch it, Tessie, I said. Come down. Of course, my admonition was enough to arouse her curiosity. Before I could prevent it, she took the book and, laughing, danced off in the studio with it. I called to her, but she slipped away with a tormenting smile at my help lens, and I followed her with some impatience. Tessie, I cried, entering the library. Listen, I'm serious. Put that book away. Put that book away. I do not wish you to open it. The library was empty. I went into both drawing rooms, then into the bedroom, laundry, kitchen, and finally turned to the library and began a systematic search. She had hidden herself so well that it was half an hour later when I discovered her, crouching white and silent by the lattice window in the storeroom above. At first glance, I saw she had been punished for her foolishness. The King in Yellow lay at her feet, but the book was open in the second part. I looked at Tessie and saw it was too late. She had opened The King in Yellow. Then I took her by the hand and led her into the studio. She seemed dazed, and when I told her to lie down on the sofa, she obeyed me without a word. After a while, she closed her eyes, and her breathing became regular and deep, but I could not determine whether or not she slept. For a long while I sat silently beside her, but she neither stirred nor spoke, and at last I rose and entered the unused storeroom, took the book in my least injured hand. It seemed heavy as lead, but I carried it to the studio again, and sitting down on the rug beside the sofa, opened it. and read it through from beginning to end. When faint with excess of my emotion, I dropped the volume and leaned wearily back against the sofa. Tessie opened her eyes and looked at me. We had been speaking for some time in a dull, monotonous strain before I realized we were discussing the King in Yellow. Oh, the sin of writing such words. Words which are clear as crystal, limpid and musical as bubbling springs. Words which sparkle and glow like the poisoned diamonds of the Medicis. Oh, the wickedness, the hopeless damnation of a soul who could fascinate and paralyze human creatures with such words, understood by the ignorant and wise alike. Words which are more precious than jewels, more soothing than music, more awful than death. We talked on, unmindful of the gathering shadows, and she was begging me to throw away the clasp of black onyx quaintly inlaid with what we now knew to be the yellow sign. I never shall know why I refused, though even at this hour, here in my bedroom I write this confession. I should be glad to know what it was that prevented me from tearing the yellow sign from my breast and casting it into the fire. I'm sure I wished to do so, and yet Tessie pleaded with me in vain. Night fell and the hours dragged on, but still we murmured to each other of the king in the pallid mask. And midnight sounded from the misty spires in the fog-wrapped city. We spoke of Hastur and of Casilda, while outside the fog rolled against the black window panes as the waves roll and break on the shores of Hali. The house was very silent now, and not a sound came up from the misty streets. Tessie lay among the cushions, her face a gray blot in gloom, but her hands were clasped in mine. And I knew that she knew and read my thoughts as I read hers. For we understood the mystery of the Hades, and the phantom of truth was laid. Then as we answered each other swiftly, silently, thought on thought, the shadows stirred in the gloom about us, and far in the distant streets we heard a sound. Nearer and nearer it came, the dull crunching of wheels, nearer and yet nearer, and now outside before the door it ceased, and I dragged myself to the window and saw a black-plumed hearse. The gate below opened and shut, and I crept shaking to my door and bolted it. But I knew no bolts, no locks, could keep that creature out who was coming for the yellow sign, and how I heard him moving very softly along the hall. Now he was at the door, and the bolts rotted at his touch. Now he had entered. With eyes staring from my head, I peered into the darkness, but when he came into the room, I did not see him. It was only when I felt him envelop me in his cold, soft grasp, as I cried out and struggled with deadly fury. But my hands were useless, and he tore the honest clasp from my coat, and struck me full in the face. Then as I fell, I heard Tessie's soft cry, and her spirit fled. And even while falling, I longed to follow her, for I knew that the King in Yellow had opened his tattered mantle, and there was only God to cry to now. I could tell more, but I cannot see what help it will be for the world. As for me, I am past human help or hope. As I lie here writing, careless even whether or not I die before I finish, I can see the doctor gathering up his powders and phials with a vague gesture to the good priest beside me, which I understand. They will be very curious to know the tragedy, they of the outside world who write books and they print millions of newspapers. But I shall write no more, and the Father Confessor will seal my last words with the seal of sanctity when his holy office is done. They of the outside world may send their creatures into wrecked homes and death-smitten firesides, and their newspapers will batten on blood and tears. But with me their spies must halt before the confessional. They know that Tessie is dead, and that I am dying. They know how the people in the house, aroused by an infernal scream, rushed into my room, and found one living and two dead. But they do not know what I shall tell them now. They do not know that the doctor said as he pointed to a horrible decomposed heap on the floor, the livid corpse of the watchman from the church. I have no theory, no explanation. That man must have been dead for months. I think I'm dying. I wish the priest would... That is the end of that story. Okay, do one more of these stories for tonight. Um, I do just need to step away just for a minute. So in which case I'll just run ahead and add right. So that way we don't have to do, well, wait. So we're okay. Just two of my pet crabs are out. They're normally hiding, but I see two of the three. It's a miracle. Maybe the third will appear. After I read this third story. Maybe that's how they're working out. I'm drawing them in by reading the story. They're big fans of Robert Chambers, apparently. Well, not that rank. They knew I was talking about them. Ahem. More French in this title. Okay. This one is the... Hold on. How is this pronounced? Help me, Google. Okay, Demoiselle DS. Demoiselle DS. Yeah, okay. Freaking French words, man. Ahem. Anyway, Demoiselle DS. Ah, crap, and it begins with more French too. Why did I not just... Okay. Pardon me. Okay. The Demoiselle D's. I'm just gonna straight the... There's the French quote. I'm just gonna do the translation that I got. But I believe I am gone down into that well so dark in which Heraclitus, the truth is hidden. And to which said... So dark in which said Heraclitus, the truth is hidden. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, four which I know not. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock, the way of the ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. Part 1. The utter desolation of the scene began to have its effect. I sat down, face I sat down to face the situation and, if possible, to recall to mind some landmark which might aid me in extricating myself from my present position. If I could only find the ocean again, all would be clear, for I knew one could see the island of Groy from the cliffs. I laid down my gun, and kneeling behind a rock lighted a pipe. Then I looked at my watch. It was nearly 4 o'clock. I might have wandered far from the Kerselect since daybreak. Standing the day before on the cliffs below Kerselect with Gilvin, looking out over the somber moors which I had now lost my way, these downs had appeared to me level as a meadow, stretching to the horizon. And although I knew how deceptive is distance, I could not realize that which from Kerselect seemed to be more grassy hollows which were great valleys covered with gorse and heather, and what looked like scattered boulders were in reality enormous cliffs of granite. "It's a bad place for a stranger," old Galvin had said. "You'd better take a guide," and I had replied, "I shall not lose myself." Now I knew that I had lost myself, and I sat there smoking, with the sea wind blowing in my face. On every side stretched the moorland, covered with flowering gorse and heath and granite boulders. There was not a tree in sight, much less a house. After a while I picked up the gun and, turning my back on the sun, tramped on again. There was little use in following any of the brawling streams which every now and then crossed my path. Instead of flowing into the sea, they ran inland to reedy pools in the hollows of the moors. I had followed several, but they all led to the swamps or silent little ponds. The ponds from which the snipe rose peeping and wheeled away in an ecstasy of fright. Began to feel fatigued. The gun galled my shoulder in spite of the double pads. The sun sank lower and lower, shining level across yellow gorse in the moorland pools. As I walked, my own gigantic shadow led me on, seeming to lengthen at every step. The gorse scraped against my leggings, crackled beneath my feet, showering the brown earth with blossoms, and the brake bowed and billowed along my path. From tufts of heath rabbits scurried away through the bracken, and among the swamp grass I heard the wild duck's drowsy quack. Once a fox stole across my path, and again, as I stooped to drink at a hurrying rill, a heron flapped heavily from the reed beside me. I turned to look at the sun. It seemed to touch the edges of the plain, when at last I decided it was useless to go on, and I must make my mind up to spend at least one night on the moors. I threw myself down, thoroughly tired out. The evening sunlight slanted warm across my body. The sea winds began to rise, and I felt a chill strike through me from my wet shooting boots. High overhead, gulls which were wheeling and tossing like bits of white paper. From some distant marsh, a solitary curlew called. Little by little, the sun sank into the plain, and the zenith flushed with the afterglow. I watched the sky change from palest gold to pink and then to smoldering fire. Clouds of midges danced above me, and high in the calm air a bat dipped and soared. My eyelids began to droop. Then, as I shook off the drowsiness, a sudden crash among the bracken roused me. I raised my eyes. A great bird hung quivering in the air above my face. For an instant I stared, incapable of motions. Then something leapt past me in the ferns, and the bird rose, wheeled and pitched headlong into the brake. Okay, I gotta take a break now, so we're just gonna have to turn that break. I will do the ad break, and then I will be right back after that, though. Mute myself. Okay, we're back. Also, my bad for not putting up the music. Okay, back to where we were. I was on my feet in an instant, peering through the gorse. There came the sound of a struggle from a bunch of heather close by, and then all was quiet. I stepped forward, my gun poised, but when I came to the heather, the gun fell under my arm again, and I stood motionless in the silent astonishment. A dead hare lay on the ground, and on the hare stood a magnificent falcon. One talon buried in the creature's neck, the other planted firmly on its limp flank. What astonished me was not the mere sight of a falcon sitting upon its prey. I had seen that more than once. It was that the falcon was fitted with a sort of leash about both talons. From the leash hung a round bit of metal like a sleigh bell. The bird turned its fierce yellow eyes on me, and then stooped and struck its curved beak into the quarry. Same instant, hurried steps sounded about among the heather, and a girl sprang into the covert in front. Without a glance at me, she walked up to the falcon, passing her gloved hand under its breast, raised it from the quarry. Then she deftly slipped a small hood over the bird's head, and holding it on her gauntlet, stooped and picked up the hare. She passed a cord about the animal's legs and fastened the end of the thong to her girdle. Then she started to retrace her steps to the covert. As she passed me, I raised my cap, and she acknowledged my presence with a scarcely perceptible inclination. I had been so astonished, so lost in my admiration of the scene before my eyes, it had not occurred to me that here was my salvation. But as she moved away, I recollected that unless I wanted sleep on a windy moor that night, I had better recover my speech without delay. At my first word, she hesitated, and I stepped before her. I thought a look of fear came into her beautiful eyes, and as humbly explained my unpleasant plight. Her face flushed, and she looked at me in wonder. "Surely you did not come from Kerselec," she repeated. Her sweet voice had no trace of the Breton accent, nor of any accent which I knew, and yet there was something in it I seemed to have heard before, something quaint and indefinable, like the theme of an old song. I explained that I was an American, unacquainted with Ministere, shooting there for my own amusement. "An American," she repeated in the same quaint musical tones. "I've never before seen an American." For a moment she stood silent, and looked at me. She said, "You should walk all night. You could not reach Kursak now, even if you had a guide." This was pleasant news. But, again, only find a peasant's hut where I might get something to eat and shelter. The falcon on our wrist flittered and shook its head. The girl smoothed its glossy back and glanced at me. "Look around," she said gently. "Can you see the end of these moors? Look. North, south, east, west. Can you see anything but moorland and bracken?" "No," I said. "The moor is wild and desolate. It's easy to enter, but sometimes the winter never leave it. There are no peasants' huts here." "Well," I said, "if you would take me in which direction Kerselec lies, tomorrow it will take me no longer to get back than it has to come." She looked at me again, with an expression almost like pity. "Ah," she said, To come is easy and takes hours. To go is different and may take centuries." I stared at her in amazement, but I decided that I had misunderstood her. Then, before I had time to speak, she drew a whistle from her belt and sounded it. "Sit down and rest," she said to me. "You've come a long distance and are tired." She gathered up her pleated skirts and motioned to me to follow, picked her dainty way through the gorse to a flat rock among the ferns. "Be here directly," she said, taking a seat at one end of the rock, invited me to sit down on the other edge. The afterglow was beginning to fade in the sky, and a silver star twinkled faintly through the rosy haze. A long, wavering triangle of waterfowl drifted southward over our heads, and from the swamps, a brown plover were calling. "They are very beautiful, these moors," she said quietly. "Beautiful, but cruel to strangers," I answered. "Beautiful and cruel," she repeated dreamily. "Beautiful and cruel." Like a woman," I said stupidly. "Oh," she cried with a little catch in her breath, and looked at me. Her dark eyes met mine, and I thought she seemed angry or frightened. "Like a woman," she repeated under her breath. How cruel to say so. And after a pause, still speaking aloud to herself, how cruel for him to say that. I don't know what sort of an apology I offered for my inane, though harmless speech, but I know that she seemed so troubled about it that I began to think I had said something dreadful without knowing it. I remembered with horror the pitfalls and snares which the French language sets for foreigners. While I was trying to imagine I might have said, a sound of voices came across the moor and the girl rose to her feet. No, she said with a trace of smile on her pale face. I'll not accept your apologies, monsieur, but I must prove you wrong, and that shall be my revenge. Look, here comes Hastur and Raoul. Two men loomed up in the twilight. One had a sack across his shoulders, and the other carried a hoop before him as a waiter carries a tray. The hoop was fastened with straps for his shoulders, and around the edge of the circlet sat 3 hooded falcons fitted with tinkling bells. The girl stepped up to the falconer. With a quick turn of her wrist, transferred her falcon to the hoop, where it quickly settled off and nestled among its mates, who shook their hooded heads and ruffled their feathers till the jelly jesses tinkled again. The other men stepped forward and bowed respectfully, took up the hare and dropped it into the game sack. These are my procurers, said the girl, turning to me with a gentle dignity. Raoul's a good falconer, and I shall one day make him grand veneur. Hastur is incomparable. The 2 silent men saluted me respectfully. Did I not tell you, monsieur, that I should prove you wrong, she continued. This then is my revenge, that you do me the courtesy of accepting food and shelter at my own house. Before I could answer, she spoke to the falconer, who started instantly across the heath, and with a gracious gesture to me, she followed. I did not know whether I made her understand how profoundly grateful I felt, but she seemed pleased to listen. As we walked over the dewy heather, "Are you not very tired?" she asked. I had clearly forgotten my fatigue in her presence, and I told her so. Don't you think your gallantry is a little old-fashioned? She said, and when I looked confused and humbled, she added, quietly, Like it. I like everything old-fashioned, and it's delightful to hear you say such pretty things. The moorland around us was very still now under its ghostly sheet of mist. The plovers had ceased their calling. The crickets and all the little creatures of the fields were silent as we passed. It seemed to me as if I could hear them beginning again far behind us. Well in advance, the 2 tall falconers strode across the heather, and the faint jingling of the hawk's bells came to our ears in distant, murmuring chimes. Suddenly, a splendid hound dashed out of the mist in front, followed by another and another until a half a dozen or more were bounding and leaping around the girl beside me. She caressed and quieted them with her gloved hand, speaking to them in quaint terms which I remembered to have seen in old French manuscripts. Then the falcons on the circlet borne by the falconer ahead began to beat their wings and scream. From somewhere out of sight, the notes of a hunting horn fluted across the moor. The hounds sprang away before us, and vanished in the twilight, the falcons flapping and squealed upon their perch, and the girl, taking up the song of the horn, began to hum. Clear and yellow, her voice sounded in the night air. Chasseur, chasseur, chasseur encore. Peut-être resat age un tonton, à pour à battre. De la ore, que la amor soit de tonton. And quick Google Translate. Okay, it's a hunting song. Okay. If you really want to go in it, you'll. Do a whole bunch of research or whatever. Anyway. As I listened to her lovely voice, a gray mass which rapidly grew more distinct loomed up in front, and the horn rang out joyously through the tumult of the hounds and falcons. A torch glimmered at the gate. A light streamed through an opening door, and we stepped upon a wooden bridge which trembled upon our feet and rose creaking and straining behind us as we passed over the moat and into a small stone court, walled on every side. From an open doorway a man came, and bending in salutation, presented a cup to the girl beside me. She took the cup and touched it with her lips, then lowering it, turned to me and said in a low voice, "I bid you welcome." That moment one of the falconers came with another cup. Before handing it to me, presented it to the girl, who tasted it. The falconer made a gesture to receive it, but she hesitated a moment, and then stepping forward, offered me the cup with her own hands. I felt this to be an act of extraordinary graciousness, but hardly knew what was expected of me. I did not raise it to my lips at once. The girl flushed crimson. I saw that I must act quickly. "Mademoiselle," I faltered, "stranger whom you have saved from dangers, may never realize empties this cup to the gentlest and loveliest hostess of France." "In his name," she murmured, crossing herself as I drained the cup. And then stepped into the doorway. She turned to me with a pretty gesture, and taking my hand in hers, led me into the house, saying again and again, "You are very welcome. Indeed, you are welcome to the Chateau d'Ys. Okay, that's section 1. Very sorry. I gotta step away for a couple seconds. Just for a minute. I'll go ahead and run the ad break so we don't have to deal with it. I'm really sorry about all these breaks. Very much. I'll make sure to change music. Though this time. right back. Crap, actually, I gotta take it. Darn it, sorry, I gotta go. I'll be right back in 30 seconds. I gotta take a, I gotta take an ibuprofen. Okay, I'm back. Alright. Back for this time. Sorry, my wrist is bothering me. Alright. I woke next morning with the music of the horn in my ears, and leaping out of the ancient bed, went to a curtain window where the sunlight filtered through little deep-set panes. The horn ceased as I looked into the court below. A man who might have been brother to the two falconers of the night before stood in the midst of a pack of hounds. A carved horn was strapped over his back. In his hand he held a long-lashed whip. The dogs whined and yelped, danced around him in anticipation. There were the stamp of horses, too, in the walled yard. "Mount!" cried a voice in Breton. And with a clatter of hoofs, the two falconers, with falcons upon their wrists, rode into the courtyard among the hounds. Then I heard another voice which set the blood throbbing through my heart. "Hero Lewis, hunt the hounds well, and spare neither spur nor whip. Thou Rule and thou Gaston. See that the Evapere does not prove himself not Nias, and if it be best in your judgment, pet quarta adius su Jardinia un eswe." Like the mew there on Pasteur's wrist, it's not difficult, but thou, Raoul, mayst not find it so simple to govern that haggard. Twice last week he phoned on V and lost the Picard, although he is used to the live. The bird acts like a stupid rentier. Patred un haggard. Ne pas si facile. Was I dreaming? The old language of falconry which I had read in yellow manuscripts, the old forgotten French of the Middle Ages, was sounding in my ears while the hounds bayed and the hawk's bell tinkled accompaniment the stamping horses. She spoke again in the sweet, forgotten language. "If you would rather attach the longe and leave thy haggard oubla, Raoul, I shall say nothing, which was a pity to spoil so fair a day's sport with an ill-trained soul. Isamir Abasia, if possible the best way. Calue don't donere de reins. I was perhaps hasty with the bird. It takes time to pass at la filere and the exercises of d'esca. Then the falconer Raoul bowed in his stirrups and replied, "If it be the pleasure of mademoiselle, I shall keep the hawk." "It is my wish," she answered. "Falconry I know, but you have yet to get me a lesson in autoris here, my poor Raoul. Sire Pere Louis, mount." The huntsman sprang into an archway, and in an instant returned, mounted upon a strong black horse, followed by a procure also mounted. She cried joyously, "Speed, Gamar Rene! Speed, speed all! Sound thy horn, Sire Pere!" The silvery music of the hunting horn filled the courtyard. The hounds sprang through the gateway and galloping hoofbeats plunged out to the paved court, bound on the drawbridge and suddenly muffled, then lost in the heather and bracken of the moors. Distant and more distant sounded the horn. Jeez, sorry. Hope that's not hiccups. Distant and more distant sounded the horn until it became so faint that the sudden carol of a soaring lark drowned in my ears. I heard the noise below responding to some call from within the house. "I do not regret the chase. I will go another time. Courtesy the stranger, she remember." And a feeble voice came quivering from within the house. "Courtesy." I stripped and rubbed myself from head to foot in the huge earthen basin of icy water which stood upon the stone floor at the foot of my bed. Then I looked about for my clothes. They were gone, but on a settle near the door lay a heap of garments which I inspected with astonishment. As my clothes had vanished, I was compelled to attire myself in the costume which had evidently been placed there for me to wear while my clothes dried. Everything was there: cap, shoes, and hunting doublet of silvery gray homespun. But the close-fitting costume and seamless shoes belonged to another century. I remembered the strange costumes of the three falconers in the courtyard. I was sure that it was not the modern dress of any portion of France or Brittany, but not until I was dressed and stood before a mirror between the windows did I realize that I was clothed much more like a young huntsman of the Middle Ages than like a Breton of that day. I hesitated and picked up the cap. Should I go down and present myself in its strange guise? There seemed to be no help for it. My own clothes were gone, and there was no bell in the ancient chamber to call a servant. So I contented myself with removing a short hawk's feather from the cap. I opened the door, went downstairs. By the fireplace in the large room at the foot of the stairs, an old Breton woman sat spinning with a distaff. She looked up at me, which I appeared, and smiled frankly, wished me health in the Breton language, to which I laughingly replied in French. At the same moment, my hostess appeared and returned my salutation with a grace and dignity that set a thrill to my heart. Her lovely head with its dark curly hair was crowned with a headdress which set all doubts as to the epoch of my own costume at rest. Her slender figure was exquisitely set off in homespun hunting gown edged with silver, and on her gauntlet-covered wrist she bore one of her petted hawks. With perfect simplicity she took my hand and led me into the garden and the court, and seating herself before a table invited me very sweetly to sit beside her. Then she asked me in her soft, quaint accent how I passed the night, and whether I was very much inconvenienced by wearing the clothes which old Pelletier had put there for me while I slept. I looked at my own clothes and shoes drying in the sun by the garden wall and hated them. What horrors they were compared with the graceful costume which I now wore. I told her this laughing, but she agreed with me very seriously. "You'll throw them away," she said in a quiet voice. In my astonishment, I attempted to explain that I could not think of accepting clothes from anybody, although, for all I knew, it might be the custom of hospitality in that part of the country. But then I should cut an impossible figure if I returned to France clothed as I was then. She laughed and tossed her pretty head, saying something in old French which I did not understand. And Pelletier trotted out with the tray, which stood 2 bowls of milk, a loaf of white bread, fruit, a platter of honeycomb, and a flagon of deep red wine. "You see, I have not yet broken my fast because I wished you to eat with me, but I'm very hungry," she smiled. "I would rather die than forget one word of what you have said," I blurted out while my cheeks burned. "She will think me mad," I added to myself, but she turned with my sparkling eyes. "Ah," she murmured, "Sir knows all there is of chivalry." She crossed herself and broke bread. I sat and watched her in her white hands, not daring to raise my eyes to hers. "Will you not eat?" she asked. "Why do you look so troubled?" Why, I knew not. I knew I would give my life to touch with my lips those rosy palms. I understood now from that moment when I looked to her dark eyes there on the moor last night I had loved her. My great and sudden passion held me speechless. "Are you ill at ease?" she asked again. Like a man who pronounces his own doom, I answered in a low voice, "Yes, I'm ill at ease for love of you." And as she did not stir nor answer, the same power moved my lips in spite of me and said, "I who am unworthy of the lightest of your thoughts, I who abuse hospitality and repay your gentle courtesy with bold assumption, I love you. With bold presumption, I love you." She leaned her head upon her hands and answered softly, "I love you. Your words are very dear to me, I love you." "Then I shall win you. Win me," she replied. All the time I had been sitting silently, my face turned toward her. She also silent, her sweet face resting on her upturned palm, sat facing me, and as her eyes looked into mine, I knew that neither she nor I had spoken human speech, but I knew that her soul had answered mine, and I drew myself up feeling youth and joyous love coursing through every vein. She, with a bright color in her lovely face, seemed as one awakened from a dream, and her eyes sought mine with a questioning glance which made me tremble with delight. We broke our fast speaking of ourselves. I told her my name, and she told me hers. The demoiselle of Jean de Yves. She spoke of her father and her mother's death, and how the 19 of her years had been passed in the little fortified farm alone with her nurse Pelagie, Claire-Marie René the procureur, and the 4 falconers, Raoul Gaston Hastur, and Sierre Pierre Louis, who had served her father. She had never been outside the moorland, never had seen a human soul before except the falconers and Pelagie. She did not know how she heard of Kerselec. Perhaps the falconers had spoken of it, but she knew the legends of Loup Garou and Jean la Flamel from her nurse Pelagie. She embroidered and spun flax. Her hawks and hounds were her only distraction. When she had met me there on the moor, she had been so frightened that she almost dropped at the sound of my voice. She had, it was true, seen ships at sea from the cliffs, but as far as the eye could reach, the moors over which she galloped were destitute of any sign of human life. There was a legend which old Pelagie told, how Winneby, once lost in the unexplored moorland, might never return, because the moors were enchanted. She did not know whether it was true. She never had thought about it until she met me. She did not know whether the falconers had even been outside, or whether they could go if they would. The books in the house, which Pelagie the nurse had taught her to read, were hundreds of years old. All this she told me with a sweet seriousness seldom seen in any one but children. My own name she found easy to pronounce, and insisted because my first name was Philip, I must have French blood in me. She did not seem curious to learn anything about the outside world, and I thought perhaps she considered it had forfeited her interest and respect from the stories of her nurse. We were still sitting at the table, and she was throwing grapes to the small field birds which came fearlessly to our very feet. I began to speak in a vague way of going, but she would not hear of it, for I knew I had promised to stay a week and hunt with hawk and bound in her company. I also obtained permission to come again from Kerselec and visit her after my return. "Why," she said innocently, "I don't know what I should do if you never come back." And I, knowing that I had no right to awaken her with sudden shock, which the avowal of my own love would bring her, sat silent, hardly daring to breathe. "You will come very often?" she asked. "Very often," I said. "Every day?" "Every day." I said, "I'm very happy. Come and see my hawks." She rose and took my hand again with the childlike innocence of possession. We walked through the garden and fruit trees to a grassy lawn which was bordered by a brook. Over the lawn were scattered 15 or 20 stumps of trees, partially embedded in the grass, and upon all these, except two, sat falcons. They were attached to the stumps by thongs which were in turn fastened with steel rivets to their legs, just above the talons. A little stream of pure spring water flowed in a winding course within easy distance of each perch. The birds set up a clamor which the girl appeared, but she went from one to another, caressing some, taking others for an instant upon her wrist, or stooping to adjust their jesses. "Are they not pretty?" she said. "Here is a falcon genteel. Call it ignoble because it takes the quarry in a direct chase. This is a blue falcon. In falconry we call it noble because it rises over the quarry and wheeling drops upon it from above. This white bird is a gerfalcon from the north. It is also noble. Here's a merlin, and this Tirth islet is a falcon heroner." I asked her how she had learned the old language of falconry. She did not remember, but thought her father must have taught her it when she was very young. Then she led me away and showed me the young falcons still in the nest. "They're termed nina in falconry," she explained, "and Churon the young bird which is just able to leave the nest and hop from branch to branch. A young bird which is not yet molted is called a soar, and a Mue is a hawk which has molted in captivity. When we catch a wild falcon which has changed its plumage, we turn it a haggard. Raoul first taught me to dress a falcon. Shall I teach you how it is done?" She seated herself on the bank of the stream among the falcons, and I threw myself at her feet to listen. Then Demoiselle Deis held up one rosy-tipped finger and began very gravely. "First one must catch the falcon." "I am caught," I answered. She laughed very prettily and told me my dressage would perhaps be difficult as I was noble. "Already tamed," I replied, jest and belled. She laughed delighted. "Pray, falcon, then will you return at my call?" "I'm yours," I answered gravely. She sat silent for a moment, and the color heightened in her cheeks, and she held up her finger again, saying, "Listen, to speak of falconry." "I listen, Countess Jean d'E." But again she fell into reverie, and her eyes seemed fixed on something beyond the summer clouds. Philip, she said at last. "Jaunet," I whispered. "That is all. That is what I wish," she said. "Philip and Jaunet." She held her hand toward me, and I touched it with my lips. "Win me," she said, but this time it was the body and soul which spoke in unison. After a while she began again. "Let us speak of falconry." "Begin," I replied. "We have caught the falcon." And Jean Dees took my hand in both of hers, and told me how, with infinite patience, the young falcon was taught to perch upon the wrist, how little by little it became used to the Belle Jesses and the chaperon et cornet. "They must first have a good appetite," she said. "Little by little I reduced their nourishment, which in falconry we call pat. When, after many nights, passed un bloc, as these birds are now, I prevail upon the haggard to stay quietly on the wrist. Then the bird is ready to be taught to come for its food. I fix the pot to the end of a thong or lure, and teach the bird to come to me as soon as I begin to whirl the cord in circles above my head. At first I drop the pat when the falcon comes, and he eats the food on the ground. After a little he will learn to seize the lure in motion, as I whirl it around my head, or drag it on the ground. After this it is easy to teach the falcon to strike at game, always remembering to faire courtesy de l'us, that is, to allow the bird to taste the quarry." A squirrel from one of the falcons interrupted her. She arose to adjust the lounge which had become whipped around the block, but the bird still flapped with its wings and screamed. "What is the matter?" she said. "Philip, can you see?" I looked around and at first saw nothing to cause the commotion, which was now heightened by the screams and flapping of all the birds. Then my eye fell upon the flat rock beside the stream from which the girl had risen. A gray serpent was moving slowly across the surface of the boulder, and the eyes in its flat triangular head sparkled like jet. "A corvus," she said quietly. "It's harmless, is it not?" I asked. She pointed to the black V-shaped figure on the neck. "It is certain death," she said. "It is a viper." We watched the reptile move slowly over the smooth rock to where the sunlight fell in a broad warm patch. I started forward to examine it. She clung to my arm, crying, "Don't, Philip, I'm afraid." "For me? For you, Philip, I love you." Took her in my arms and kissed her on the lips, but all I could say was, "Jean, Jean, Jean." Trembling on my breast, something struck my foot in the grass below, but I did not heed it. Then again something struck my ankle, and a sharp pain shot through me. I looked into the sweet face of Jaunet and kissed her. With all my strength lifted her on my arm and flung her from me. Then bending, I tore the viper from my ankle and set my heel upon its head. I remember feeling weak and numb, I remember falling to the ground. Through my slowly gazing eyes, I saw Johnny's white face bending close to mine, and when the light in my eyes went out, I still felt her arms about my neck, and her soft cheek against my drawn lips. When I opened my eyes, I looked around in terror. Johnny was gone. I saw the stream and the flat rock. I saw the crushed viper in the grass beside me, but the hawks and blocks had disappeared. I sprang to my feet. The garden, the fruit trees, the drawbridge, and the walled court were gone. I stared stupidly at a heap of crumbling ruin, ivy covered and grave, through which great trees had pushed their way. I crept forward, dragging my numbed foot, and as I moved, a falcon sailed from treetops to the ruins, and soaring, mounting in wing circles, faded and vanished in the clouds above. "Johnny, Johnny," I cried, but my voice died on my lips, and I fell on my knees among the weeds, and as God willed it, I, not knowing, had fallen kneeling before a crumbling shrine, carved in stone for our Mother of Sorrows. I saw the sad face of the Virgin wrought in cold stone. I saw the cross and thorns at our feet, and beneath it I read, "Pray for the soul of the Demoiselle Jean Deis, who died in her youth for love of Philip, a stranger, A.D. 1573. But upon the icy slab lay a woman's glove, still warm and fragrant." That is the end of that story. Alright, so we're gonna end there as far as like the story readings. So next time we will pick up with next time we'll start up with the story, The Prophet's Paradise. So, but yeah, thank you for joining me on that. To see y'all next time. I'll see y'all next week for the next reading.